machine examining it may not be the most accurate assessment. So it's still advised that you speak to it to a person and not really to a machine. Incidentally, research suggests that emotional writing, empirically in terms of experiments, it has proven more effective with men than with women. There's been recorded evidence of the fact that emotional writing works more for men than for women, perhaps because of the fact that women prefer to speak out rather than write out. But that could be perhaps one of the reasons. I would reiterate, if it's an extreme trauma that you're talking about, do consider using the tool with other things, which could include medication from a psychiatrist if that's applicable, or medication from a doctor if it's a physical ailment. Use it alongside, don't use it on your own. Usually emotional writing in the first couple of sessions causes the distress, and this is important for us to know if we intend to use it as a tool. It tends to cause distress, it tends to cause depression because you're bringing out emotions that perhaps lie buried, the emotions that sometimes lie completely unacknowledged as well. So don't be surprised if you're feeling depressed when you start emotional writing. It's all right, go through the process nevertheless. Don't stop the process, that's very important. Once you've started it, please complete the process. So if you've spoken of about 4 sessions a week, ensure that you do your 4 sessions a week. If it gets overwhelming after 4 sessions, you may stop for a few days and then start again if you think you've not released it completely. How do we realize we've not released it completely is when we still identify with the emotion, a recall, a memory of the incident, if it still causes an upsurge of emotion, and that emotion could be anger, it could be sadness, it could be grief. If you still feel that, then it means you've still not overcome it. So do restart the process, but give it a break. Don't do it completely. Don't overwhelm yourself with it. Which is why, again, we say not more than 20 minutes at a time. In a therapeutic setting, you would normally do 20 minutes of writing, and usually the patient is given about 10 minutes after to compose himself or herself, because very often there is a breakdown in the early stages, which is normal and which is healthy. So again, don't be scared of the fact that it's causing those upheavals. It's meant to cause upheavals. The way the process works is that because you write out emotions, one thing that happens is you identify the emotions very clearly on paper. Right? So it's not really about talking to yourself about it, because very often when we feel sad and we verbally acknowledge that, okay, I'm feeling sad, the next natural response is, alright, let me do something that will make me happy. So you don't stay with the emotion. So you go listen to music, you go out for a walk, you go and dance, but you don't stay with the emotion. Here, because you're writing it out, you stay with the emotion. And simply in that acknowledgement, there is a sense of feeling, because you acknowledge the fact that, yes, I went through this. So that's one factor that causes the healing. Secondly, emotional writing happens in a series of sessions. So it's not just one time that you write about it. You repeatedly write about the same incident for those 4 or 5 sessions that you do. So you realize that in the course of the sessions, you get familiar with the emotion, and then it's not so scary anymore. The sheer familiarity with it brings down the power of the emotion, because you realize, alright, I know this, so what? In spite of it, I've moved on, I still live, which means it's alright. It was not a very big deal. So the familiarity brings about a sense of healing. So that's another thing that happens in the process. Also, with in a lot of cases where the patient is easily able to access his or her emotion, a lot of times there's dialogue that happens with the so-called perpetrator of that emotion, if there is one. she was feeling was anger and not grief, not so much of grief. And that's when she started the process of emotional writing. And the initial writing, the initial sessions, what came out was mother did this when I was young, mother did that when I was young. And the records normally show, most of the writing was about the fact that when I was young, when I was 11 years old, mom compared me with my brother and sister and said, you're not good enough, look at him, he's got an A+, why don't you get so much? The neighbor's kid is doing so well, right? And what have you done, this drawing is so bad. That kind of, that was the kind of response that she would always have with the mother. And she's written about several incidents like this where she said that the mother always compared her with several other people, including siblings. And the standard statement or the standard response which she got from the mother was, you're not good enough. So she lived with that feeling of hurt about the mother, and as she started writing, she started dialoguing with the mother as if the mother were present. And that's where the healing took about, where she said, Mom, if you're listening to me now, why don't you realize that you were never a mother to me, you were always a critic. Right? I wanted you to be a mother, and I think a mother should be nurturing, a mother should be caring, and a mother should be encouraging. You were none of this, so I don't really appreciate you as a mother. And when she wrote that, there was a whole lot of reflection that came in through the writing, and somewhere she started understanding where the mother came from, what the mother's perspective was. So obviously the mother compared her because the mother wanted her to be good or better than what she was. So in a sense, perhaps the intention of the mother was to encourage, but it did not come out in those many words. And then she realized as she wrote that yes, mother could not be encouraging because she was going through a lot of trouble herself in terms of managing the house, managing all the children by herself without too much of help, and therefore there was a lot of frustration in the mother which got projected onto the child. So as she started writing, as she started dialoguing through the writing, a lot of responses came to her, and the mother's perspective came to her, which eventually closed the relationship. Instead of the anger being there, it closed in terms of saying, all right, this was what my mother's purpose was in my life. I understand that now, and now I let her go. And there was a proper closure. So that's a classic case study that's used here. So yes, in the initial few sessions, do expect distress, do expect depression. It's normal. And when you're scheduling your writing sessions, if you're doing it by yourself, do ensure that you have at least 30-40 minutes when sir?
In the first place, I fail to understand as to why you should communicate with a person who is dead and gone. We have been advised that you pray for them for their further progress. And as regards Claire, why was she not able to understand the good points of her mother? I am sure enough, you see, that she must have, along with the bad, there must be also a little bit of good. And she was unfair to herself when she only magnified the negative part of it and forgot all about the positive part of it. The positive part of it came much later when she was in communication.
Right. So, see, here we're not talking of communication as in a seance. We're not really talking of calling the spirit.
No, but
it's about her communication with herself. See, a lot of times, a lot of relationships, like let's say motherhood, or fathers, or brothers, or sisters, we're talking of communicating with the archetype of the mother within self. Right? It's not about communicating with the dead mother as in the spirit of the mother. What Claire was going through was the fact that she'd magnified the negativity of the mother, which very often happens to us. The reason why that happens is because a lot of times we like to have that villain in our life. We like to have that villain in our life because it's very comfortable. Anything that goes wrong in your life, you have that person to blame.
She was not fair to herself. What I want to
A lot of times we're not. It's just that comes with a lot of emotional maturity, which not everyone may be born with. You can evolve to it, certainly. But not everyone may be at it.
And what will you say about not communicating with the dead and gone? Please pray for them for the further progress, but don't recall them. They say you are halting their progress when you are recalling them because they are on their path of progress.
Okay.
What would you say to them?
Here it was not recall.
Just a minute, let her answer
But
that.
you have come late, so you have
My
come...
question is directed to her. Let her answer.